go ahead and do introductions around the room. Do you want to start
Me?
here with you at the
I'm
table?
on this end, yeah. Roman Kohler, I'm with the Homesteaders.
Doug Schaff, City and County of Broomfield.
Brittany Morgan, City of Urbana.
And Ireland is Staples.
Pat O'Connell, Jefferson County.
Melissa Weakley from the Stewardship Council.
David Abelson, the Executive Director.
Dan Coleman, Mayor of the City of Thornton, and Chair.
Mark Vanderwall, Center of Vanderwall Legal Counsel.
Linda Porter, League of Women Voters.
Claire Levy, Boulder County Commissioner.
Jeanette Hillary, I'm with the League of Women Voters, and I'm also the Secretary Treasurer.
Mark Lasis, Town of Superior.
Seymour, Westminster City Council.
Kim Griffiths, Candella's resident.
Marnie Ratzel, City of Boulder.
Shelley Stanley, City of North Bend staff.
Tria Nance, City of Westminster staff.
Caleb Owen, City of Thornton.
And we can have the audience as well.
You can start, Giselle, since you're front row.
Hi, I'm Giselle Grisfeld. I'm from Longmont, Colorado.
Good morning, Chris Stewart. I'm with RSI MTech, support contractor to DOE.
Terry Bolton, also with RSI and Tech.
Lindsay Marl, State of Colorado.
Lucas Stacks, Attorney General's Office, Counsel for CDPHE. Travis Cully, Boulder County.
Harry McShay, also with RSI and Tech.
Ramona Phillips, RSI Intech.
Patrick Benson, Department of Energy.
Dana Santi, RSI Intech.
Sean Eichelberger, Department of Energy. I assist Andy Kime, the site manager, who is on vacation this week.
Max Dotson, Broomfield resident.
Chris Allred from Longmont.
And the lady that just joined us, that just sat down.
Laura Hubbard, City and County of Broomfield staff.
Thank you so much. All right, any questions about the agenda from the board? All right, we'll move into public comment. So these are related to the consent agenda or non-agenda items only. Anyone from the public that wanted to make comment this time? We have two, so you're great. Okay. Start with Giselle.
Do I just sit?
That's fine. You just wherever you'd like to be.
All right. Good morning. My name is Giselle Hersfeld. As a member of the public who is deeply concerned about the ongoing impacts of radioactive contamination at Rocky Flats, I have appreciated the opportunity to view and engage in these meetings virtually over the past 2 years. As the Rocky Flats Stewardship Council moves to transition away from virtual meetings to in-person meetings, I have some concerns regarding public transparency and access. It is absolutely essential that the opportunities for virtual engagement continue and that recordings of all Rocky Flats Stewardship Council meetings are made available for online viewing. This is not an extraordinary request. It is not a request that requires advanced technical capacities or that is beyond the budget of the Stewardship Council. In fact, many of the local governments present at the meeting today regularly host meetings that offer a hybrid option for public engagement and post meeting recordings online. This is because these governments recognize the value of community engagement, input, and transparency. I'm sure many of the Stewardship Council members here could offer advice and recommend resources to make a hybrid option and meeting recordings available to the public. It is actually a very simple ask, given the gravity of the subject matter you are discussing. The Rocky Flats Stewardship Council has stated that its mission is to provide continuing local engagement on activities occurring at the Rocky Flats site regarding long-term stewardship of residual contamination and refuge management, to provide an ongoing mechanism to help maintain public knowledge of Rocky Flats and the ongoing needs and responsibilities regarding contaminant management and refuge management, and to provide an ongoing forum to engage on all other issues pertinent to Rocky Flats. Providing a hybrid option and meeting recordings falls well within the scope of this mission. If the Department of Energy is serious about this important mission, I'm sure they could offer extra funding to this council if needed to make that possible. The 2023 proposed budget for the council is $167,900. I'm sure some of this could easily be allocated to ensuring greater public transparency. Lastly, I am concerned about the overall lack of accessibility at these in-person meetings. The meeting time, 8:30 a.m. on a Monday, directly overlaps with regular working hours for many people. Why are these meetings held at such an inconvenient time while City Council and County Commissioner meetings are generally held in the evenings to facilitate and encourage public participation? It almost feels as if public participation is not actually a priority of this council. Thank you for hearing me today.
Thank you. Go with the gentleman in the back.
Hi everyone, my name is Travis Cully. I first want to apologize for any hostility that you may feel from our first impression in September. It was not my objective at all to warrant anyone standing up or intimidating or threatening people in the room. I felt that there was a lot of hostility, and my first objective here in speaking out is to calm that hostility. My second apology is this: I've been sly. I addressed my statement of interest to sit on the board to Mr. David Abelson. Given the parameters of his position, I understand that it is not necessary to share my statement of purpose with you. I've corrected my statement of purpose, and I've presented it to you, and I'll present it to you during public comment. When I tried to contact David through the website, I got this message, right? I left this message. I got this message immediately in reply.
What are you getting?
I'll send, you have copies, I'll give them to you now. And this is my statement of purpose updated. I guess restating some of the questions about the openness of this conversation, I wanted to point you to this second item here.
Travis, I'll have our web person look into this.
Thank you. My third apology is that my statement of interest is long. If you could keep that.
Thank you.
This one. Oh, I see. It's a bundle. Okay.
Good morning, Council. My name is Chris Allred, and I'm a local stakeholder who's been studying Rocky Flats for about 8 years. The Rocky Flats Stewardship Council is a federally mandated local stakeholder organization. There are federally mandated tenets for public participation and public information regarding the post-closure operations of the Rocky Flats Superfund site. This council is failing to meet its legal mandate by not allowing an inclusive setting for public engagement. I will present 4 points. First, this council is not providing an accessible forum for the public to attend. Meetings need to be in the evenings after the 9 to 5 regular business meeting, after the 9 to 5 workday. Every elected official here knows from city governments that city meetings are held in the evenings when people are able to attend. It doesn't need a lot more explanation why 8:30 on a Monday morning is not accessible to the public. Every elected official, the second point, every elected official here knows that city council meetings are recorded and broadcasted live, recorded for the public record. On a topic such as Rocky Flats, there are many intricate details that get addressed in these meetings, technical details that are not going to end up being reflected in the minutes. So there needs to be a recording for the public record so that people are able to engage with this process. Third, these meetings need to be held at a location where recording and hybrid technology is available. It needs to be an ADA accessible location. I don't think that this location fits ADA accessibility. And it is not helpful for the hearing impaired or the mobility impaired. That's why a hybrid meeting is necessary as well, for closed captioning and that people may attend remotely. Again, these are required by federal law for this organization. It is a federal mandate. The fourth point is that this council suffers from a conflict of interest, where 90% of its funding is from the Department of Energy. That's reflected here in everyone's budget for review today. The vast majority of this is going to the executive director. Why is not more of this money being allocated to public accessibility to these meetings? I don't know why it's gone on for so long if this meeting's been held at 8:30 a.m. when that is clearly a part of its initial founding, is public engagement. So I'll stop there for the public comment, but I would like to share a copy of a letter written by John Lipsky and Michael Ketterer. John Lipsky is a former FBI agent who led the raid on Rocky Flats, and Dr. Ketterer is a PhD chemist who's been studying plutonium at Rocky Flats and many other sites around the nation. So I'd like for the board to, if you haven't already, please do review this letter. It has very important information about this conflict of interest. And I'll address this further when we get to the budget item. Please take one flash.
Hey, Chris, we had a 3-minute time thing and you're past that, so just wrap it up.
Okay, thank you. I hope that there are leaders here who will speak out today and make sure that for 2023 that these meetings are more accessible and that this conflict of interest is being addressed, and that this agency, this council is living up to its federal mandated duty. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public wanted to provide public comment this morning? All right, we'll move on to the next item on business items. We have the consent agenda. Are there any questions about the minutes or the checks? Can I get a motion to approve the minutes and checks?
I'll make a motion, we accepted it.
Is there a second? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, please say nay. All right, the consent agenda has passed, and we will go to the executive director's report.
Thank you. I want to talk about one thing, but I also just want to talk about two things. So I just want to just say something about what Chris says. What he said about your funding is entirely correct. Most of the money for this organization comes from the Department of Energy. That is a fact. It's in the budget. It's a known thing. There's nothing unknown about that. But here's what I want to point out. Everybody that you employ works for you. The decision to hire and maintain staff is the decision of the board. The decision of how do you expend those funds is up to you. Not the Department of Energy, not any outside entity, you. It's you guys. And any suggestion that somehow any of you board members are compromised by the source of the funding, please show me that. Please show me where that's actually factually accurate. None of you, I have ever seen an instance where anybody has compromised what they believe because of the budget, because of the source of funding. But that's the claim that just gets made, that somehow there's some compromising of what you believe and how you represent your constituencies. And I've seen this board change through the years. I've seen, you get the full spectrum of views on this board as we get different elected officials. One year you have a government that has one set of views. A couple of elections later, 180-degree difference. Same source of money. There's no change. There's nothing changing because of the source of money. There's nothing changing because of the budget parameters. You guys know that. But it's something we hear a lot. We hear that a lot. We also hear that, and I'm going to speak about this, we also hear that there is somehow something wrong because you're meeting in person. This organization was established. If you look at the legislation, it says the organization shall be elected officials. There was a compromise made. There was a compromise made by then Senator Wayne Allett, a Republican, and then Congressman Mark Udall, a Democrat. And as they got rid of this, what's called the Citizens Advisory Board, which was a community DOE advisory board, members said, hey, we want to still have non-governmental representation. And so a deal was struck. And the deal was there would be 4 non-governmental seats on the board of directors. But the legislation, the intent, was that you as elected officials and your staff, you are elected to represent constituencies. You are elected to represent your communities. You're elected to hear from your constituents. And that is the core and the central focus of this organization. And why do we meet during the day? Because most city councils meet at night, and trying to find a time that there's actually at night during the week that we can actually meet, good luck. Good luck finding that. And so we meet during the day. It's when the commissioners meet. And so that's why we meet during the day. We meet during the day to make sure that we can have the local government and community engagement sitting at this table, which is the central focus of why Congress decided to create these new organizations called local stakeholder organizations. Now, what's remarkable is that I went back and I've been sort of trying to think about, well, how is engagement during COVID? You know, there's this idea that somehow virtual brings in more people. There's this idea that somehow virtual leads to greater engagement. And I'm sure there are statistics to show that, to prove that you can go back and you can look at and say, well, you know, pick any government. We had more people during COVID. But for us, we had less people. We had fewer people during COVID. I don't know why. I went back and I looked at every single member of the public, none of you sitting around the table, none of DOE, the regulators. I included you, Max, you know, former EPA, but now you're here as an individual, now representing the EPA. And I went back and I looked over 8 years. I figured starting in 2014 was a good time frame. 2014 is 8 years past closure. So I figure, okay, let's start 8 years past closure and let's go for 8 years. Let's see what we get. 143 individuals attended our meetings. If you go to closure sites or cleanup sites, 143, you can't get that at most of these communities. We've had 143 different individuals. And the greatest over that 2014 through September of 2022 was 2015 through 2019. That was sort of our cream of the crop years of number of people. What brought it out? Well, started in 2015, January 2015. Fish and Wildlife was coming to talk to the board about prospect of a controlled bird. Boy, 20-something people, I can't remember exactly, I've got it written down here, but, and so that was a lot of people. What we saw during COVID was actually a decrease in engagements to the numbers that we saw in 2014. Chris handed out a letter, I wasn't gonna mention this, Chris handed out a letter from John Lipsky and Michael Ketterer. If Michael Ketterer walked in the room right now, I would not know who he is. If I don't know who he is, and do you know why I don't know who he is? He's come to one meeting, exactly one meeting. And it was the April 2016 meeting. He came. How many did he come to during online, during COVID, our virtual meeting? 0. John Lipsky hasn't come to a meeting since 2017. He came in 2014, and then from 2015 to 2017, he came to 9 of the 15 meetings. That's not a lot. That's 0 online. We got a few new people while we were virtual. We got Giselle, for instance, and she was a fairly regular attendee. So when you hear these numbers, when you hear these ideas that somehow there's something exclusive going on, it's not happening. It's not happening. We have as many people in this room today as we are regularly getting, except for one meeting during the 2 years where we were virtual. But what do we gain? We gain you all getting to know one another, you all being able to understand what each other is thinking. And you, the public, you gain 2 things. You gain direct access to DOE, to CDPHE, to EPA, to DOE contractors. You get direct access to elected officials who you're not going to have access to when they're online. Is it a perfect situation? It will never be perfect. That's not what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is make sure that we have, per the local stakeholder organization legislation, we have that engagement of the governments. That is the central purpose why this was started, and that's what we have. And so I didn't really fully see this until I went and looked at the numbers. And the numbers are the numbers, you know? We had during COVID, let me see if I can quickly find this. We had 8 new people attend meetings, 8 over the 2 years. And of that, 3 only attended 1 meeting. So that means during COVID, we had 5 people that had never come before who then stayed on for more than 1 meeting. That's not a lot. We had 17 different people in general attend during COVID. 17 out of 143 over an 8-year period. It's not a lot of people. So for whatever reason, I don't know what it is. Sometimes I think it's just that a lot of people who tend to come, they don't feel comfortable staring at a computer. They don't want to, that's not how they want to engage. I don't know the answer. But what I do know is that the central focus and the central purpose this organization was set up, I can see today. I can see before the meeting, after the meeting. Randy comes and sits down, Devin says, good to see you. Like, that's real engagement, right? They'll talk after the meeting. You know, Mark and Rich, you know, we're talking about elected officials from different communities. This is why the LSO legislation is so important. And this is why we meet during the day. This is why we're here. You guys can engage more. And you'll remember from the last meeting, our first in-person meeting, we had more true engagement, true back and forth, than we had all during COVID. And that's what we're trying to accomplish. It's not perfect. It'll never be perfect. Will it satisfy everybody? Of course not. But take to heart what the statistics show. And what they show is a big decrease in engagement of community members during COVID. A big decrease. We are averaging for those first years from 2014 through 2019, we are averaging 20 new people a year. 20 new people. During COVID, you know what our average per year was? It was 8.5. 8.5 total number of people engaged during COVID. We had 17 people total engaged. It's not a lot compared to what we had in person. Will our numbers ever go back up? I don't know. But COVID actually, we did see a sharp decrease. So I just wanted you to be all aware of that. I wasn't planning to wrap in some of what Chris said, but it was just sitting right there because what he was speaking to was really important, you know? And it's an important perspective, it's an important opinion. This letter that was sent, you know, to DOE, there's stuff in here that I just wanted to flag for you, just why it's so misleading. So that's all I had. Any questions, just let me know.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, David, for that perspective. I think it's really important. And I think being in person really, really, really adds value. Like you said, we get to talk to one another, in the public, get to
hear airplanes take off.
Yeah, we get to hear firsthand the hazing that the residents of Boulder County are subjected to going to the airport. But I do feel we learned something during COVID about the potential for hybrid meetings, and maybe your data doesn't show that it increased participation, but maybe it did allow other people to participate who wouldn't be able to participate in person. And I think what's happening with local governments, I know what Boulder County it is, and the ones we interact with regularly, is that they have found a way to do hybrid meetings. And I think it is good for the public, and it's good for openness and accountability. So I don't know what it would take to set up this room so that there could be hybrid participation, but I think it's something we ought to at least consider.
Sure. So the executive committee did review that as an option. We were looking at what all the other local communities are doing, because I know in my city councils, you know, we're on hybrid, but it's also set up in a way that we're in council chambers with cameras, and it makes it easier for the public to see. I sit on the Metro Mayor's Coalition, and we tried hybrid. And with the number of people, which is larger than this group, but this is probably the largest group that I sit in that has a full board that communicates with each other, it was almost impossible for the people that were online to be able to communicate with the people that were in the room. And so that hybrid didn't work with Metro Mayor, so we actually stopped doing it. Trying to get more people to participate. But what I noticed during COVID, because I became the chair during COVID, is that none of the board even was able to participate. Because we would sit and stare at our screens and we'd watch the presentation, And if we had questions, maybe we would ask David on the side, but there was no engagement from the electeds. Whereas when we sit in this room, we actually engage with each other and have conversations and get to hear perspectives instead of just sitting there listening to another meeting. And I definitely appreciate the need to have the public participate. From this room setup, it was really difficult, and maybe Devin, you can step into, because I know we had a lot of conversations about it with the executive committee. But at the same time, the purpose of this board is not necessarily making a decision related to Rocky Flats. It is providing information that is disseminated to the local governments where we make decisions as local governments. So it's a different kind of engagement.
No, I appreciate that, and I do think the members of the council should be here in person. I just think there ought to be another option for the public to absorb and participate if possible.
Yeah, I appreciate Claire's comments, and I agree with them. So I'm the chair of the Rocky Mountain Metropolitan Airport Community Noise Roundtable. So we meet in this room. We have a hybrid option. It's a smaller group, so we only have 7 members, so we don't have necessarily as large a setup here. But it seems to work pretty well, particularly with respect to allowing public participation. So for the people who want to attend the meetings, who want to give public comment, they can participate remotely. They can also just kind of watch the meetings. I think that's helpful. I think where the hybrid format tends to not be as effective is, as kind of Claire indicated, when some of the members are remote versus being in person. So I think the best of all worlds really is to have the members around the table, have a hybrid option available for the public to participate via public comment or just to watch, and then to keep recordings of the meetings so people can go back and watch them to the extent that they're not available. I think it's something that this council should try and kind of iterate as we go along. I know that the airport has the owl camera that'll go around and spin, and
that's what we used at Metropolitan too.
and it's it's not perfect, but it's better than nothing. So I'd be in favor of at least trying things out and seeing how they go, because I do think that it's important to give the public as much of an opportunity to participate and at least watch the process as possible.
Yeah, I'll jump into this conversation. I agree. I think that having members be here is so important. I think that that's one thing with the city and county of Broomfield that we really stress to our elected officials is that we are in the room. There are occasions when, due to illness or things like that, we cannot be there in the room, and we make those accommodations. But the standard operating procedure is that we as elected officials are in the room. Our remote participation or public participation is by phone only. That seems to work for us, in that we don't have yet another video to have to deal with, because that is just one other element. So that would be an option, I think, is to have a way for people to call in as opposed to video in. And then I would be in favor of having the meetings video recorded. I think that that's a good option. Is to, I don't know what the funding looks like, David, in terms of DOA's ability to give us some funding to have these meetings video recorded, that would be a way for someone to view this in the future. But to go with a hybrid meeting, to deal with the stuff that we've dealt with for the last 3 years of public, interrupting the meetings and just kind of people being on top of one another, I just don't think that that's going to work. And I would move away from that kind of hybrid, option. But having the ability for someone to call in to provide public comment, I think that would work. And for the meetings to be video recorded, I think that would be a good option that we could pursue.
Yeah, I would just add that I agree with everything that's been said. I think that for full transparency and for the public to feel that they can engage, I think a hybrid option should be explored. We should be able to allow folks to call in and also be able to watch and view from inside this room. So I think that's what
we can add it to the executive committee to discuss again. We looked at all of those options. We looked at phone calls. We looked at the challenge on the electronic side is that DOE requires us to use WebEx. So we can't use Zoom, we can't use Teams, which is what most of us use in our elective worlds, which adds a layer of challenge to it. But we can look at what that option might be to have someone call in. Something we do on our city councils in our planning sessions that are not video recorded They are audio recorded, and then the audio is available as needed. So I don't know if that's an option, again, with the number of people in this room, it might.
Camera is that someone's typing, the camera goes to that person, right? How you set up a camera, let's just say you can find the midpoint of this room. To get that thing to keep swiveling for this big a space, I don't think it's realistic. That's why we did look at those videos, we watched video of them and said it's just not gonna work. The other thing that I'm curious about, and which doesn't mean, you know, Jan said we'll explore and we'll explore it again. The other thing Deb and I got a question about is, who's gonna manage the mute function? If you have a council, right? You got, your council is 10, is that correct? So they have 10 people, they know exactly who's who. But if I got a couple of you at home, and then I got, just say this many people, who's gonna know who should be allowed to speak and not allowed to speak? That's what I've not been able to figure out. Because you know how much we got disrupted on our virtual meetings, right? I mean, there were times we had to just say, stop or we're muting you. How do we manage that element? And I don't expect an answer today, but that's something I've yet to figure out. Because if we put money aside, because money's not an issue, if we hire a company to come in and manage this for us, who's going to manage that disruption? Who's going to manage the mute? Let's say you use this screen and you see all the people. Who's going to say, oh yeah, that person can speak, that person can't? How are they going to know Jacob is with government's not a member of the public? I don't know the answer to that.
So the way we've worked it on the Community Noise Roundtable here, and we use WebEx for that as well, is anybody that's in the meeting as a panelist, they have the ability to control their own mute function. Members of the public who want to give public comment, are listed in advance. We have a queue basically set up, and then the chair recognizes those people
Is
to
that on
speak.
Zoom?
No, it's on WebEx.
On WebEx, okay.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I feel your pain with WebEx, but I mean, it's not a perfect system. It's one of those. I think we're constantly getting better at it, and people are more comfortable with it. And there's always growing pains with it, but I think it's important for organizations like this to try to do the best that they can to be accessible, given the constraints of people's availability schedules, the state of pandemics around the world, and not perfect, but I feel your pain with the owl. Yeah, the owl's not perfect. It picks up people typing, it picks up side conversations, but generally when somebody is actually speaking, it'll swivel to the right face.
Yeah, I would say that, if we were meeting monthly, even if we were meeting every other month, I'd say, yeah, go ahead and have a hybrid option for us elected officials. The fact that we were meeting just once a quarter, we don't see each other in person but 4 times a year. And I think it's so important for this group to be able to be in person. I think to answer the public participation piece, for our public comments, we have a screening service and a number that the public calls into. There's that screening service that happens behind the scenes. They get their name, they get their telephone number, they get their neighborhood, and they kind of get a gist of what they want to say. The reason we do that is in case they drop the phone call, they have that record of information, and that way that can be provided for the elected officials. So that would be one way to handle that, would be have some type of screening service, a number that they can call into, and we can provide that opportunity for that to be able to participate. But I think for us elected officials, the hybrid option, I don't think we should pursue, because we're only meeting 4 times a year, and it's so important for this group to be here in person with one another. We have done this for 3 years, and it's great to see you all and be with you all in person.
So we'll take it back to the executive committee, which I know, David, you're on. So we'll have more conversations, I think, on the public piece of it, because I think before we did focus on hybrid for all of us, but if the focus is just on the public piece, maybe there's an alternative we can come up with. So David's got that as an action item for us.
What I'll do is, I'm not going to wait till our normal timing for the executive committee meeting, because that's way too close to the meeting. So I'll schedule something for much sooner, so we might want to have a couple of conversations. There's some questions I have even about that, just in terms of room setup. You all are not mic'd. You know, you put a speaker in the front, will they be able to hear us? So I have questions. So I'll just set that up sometime, probably in the next few weeks. Hopefully get it before Thanksgiving, but maybe it'll be right after Thanksgiving. Obviously, that's a public meeting. The notice goes to all the board, all the public, so I'll set that up. So just keep thinking about that for the three of you.
Any additional from the director's report? All right, so the next item is actually an executive session. Do you want to talk to us about
Sure.
this?
So when we've had different contracts through the years, you know, just minor adjustments. But one of the agreements we had when we first started the contract was it's got an automatic renewal unless one party opts to terminate it. And so the board said, yeah, that's good because it's just simpler, because we were going through new contracts every year and it just was difficult. And sort of the agreement, and we're going back a long way now, or I can't remember, but more than a decade. The agreement basically was that annually we give the board the option of going into executive session, right, because we're talking about personnel here, to discuss the people who you hire. And really what you're discussing is Melissa and me. You know, you can discuss Barb, you can discuss Jennifer as our finances. We put it down as an option for the board. It is not something that the board chooses to do every year. So the executive session would be to go discuss personnel matters, and if you want to go into executive session, now's the time. If you don't, we will skip over it and move into the next part of the meeting. So when the executive committee talked about this, basically the message was, put it on the agenda, let's see what the board wants to do. If the board wants to go to executive session, let's go to executive session. If you don't, we're not. So,
and you can ask questions related to the contract without going into executive session. It just, if you have a specific question for David, if we're going to talk personnel and performance, we have to go into executive session for that. So if you want to ask questions first to decide whether or not you want to go to executive session, we can do that. Is anyone interested in going into executive session? Are we okay with the process? I'm going to assume silent means we're okay with the process. All right, we will move on to the next item, which is the work plan.
Work plan. It's very simple. We brought it to you last month. There were no changes. So as I told you last month, we're just going to do a quick work plan approval. And so before we take a motion, let's just see if there's any questions about the work plan.
Any questions? All right, does someone want to make a motion to approve the 2023 work plan?
I move to approve the 2023 work plan.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, please say nay. The work plan is approved. Next item is new member selection. Oh wait, I skipped over one, sorry. The 2023 budget.
2023 budget, okay. So the budget, Barb will explain the process. So let me just quickly talk about the budget, and then there was only one item that came up last time. The item that came up last time was splitting out, and this is on page 3, between revenue and carryover. You'll recall Pat and Rich had that same question about carryover and revenue, so that's been clarified on the bottom of page 3. There were no changes to the budget as presented last time, so that's it. Barb, do you want to explain the process for the budget hearing?
The process. The Stewardship Council is a unit of local government, a political subdivision of the state of Colorado. It's required to comply with the budget laws of the state. One of those is to have a draft budget made available by October 15, which was done. And now you are getting ready to hold a public hearing, which has been specially noticed. And the chair will open the public hearing on the budget, entertain comments from the public on the budget. Upon conclusion of those comments, the chair will close the public hearing, and then the board will have an opportunity to deliberate. And at the end of the discussion, we'll have an opportunity to approve with or without any changes. I do have a resolution to memorialize those actions. That budget will be filed with the state at the end of the year, or the end of January, actually.
Should questions of the board have be part of the public hearing as well, or just the comment?
Questions and comments.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and open the public hearing. The topic of discussion is the budget. Are there any questions from the board before I ask for public comment? All right, I'll open it up for public comment. Is there anyone in the public that wished to give comment on the budget this morning? Giselle?
Hi again, my name is Giselle Hirschfeld. As the Rocky Flat Stewardship Council will be approving the 2023 budget today, I would like to reiterate my deep concern at the fact that the vast majority of Stewardship Council funding comes directly from the Department of Energy, totaling $150,800. The majority of this DOE grant, $102,300 of it, covers the expenses of just 2 personnel. What do these 2 personnel do that requires $8,525 per month? They guide the narrative of the Stewardship Council. This funding represents a serious conflict of interest because the DOE is the federal department responsible for the environmental crimes and radioactive contamination at Rocky Flats to begin with. Moreover, in their continued $2 trillion pursuit to produce and modernize the U.S. nuclear weapons arsenal, the DOE has a vested interest in protecting the public perception of the nuclear weapons development. Right now, for example, they are trying to expand plutonium pit production at the Savannah River site in South Carolina, which is located close to low-income communities of color, and they are receiving public pushback. It is in their interests, it is in their interest to have the public believe that there is no lingering danger at what was once the top plutonium pit production facility in the United States. In giving such a generous grant to cover the vast majority of Stewardship Council operating costs, the DOE is effectively creating an incentive for council leadership to go along with and promote the DOE narrative of Rocky Flats, a narrative driven by a desire to defend and uphold the nuclear weapons complex, more than a desire to protect public health and safety. This fits under the definition of regulatory capture, where an agency charged with acting in the public interest instead acts in ways that benefit incumbent firms in the industry it is supposed to be regulating. Industries devote large budgets to influencing regulators, while individual citizens spend only limited resources to advocate for their own rights. When a polluter pays for its own regulation and oversight, that is regulatory capture. It is hard to challenge or question someone when they give you $150,800 a year. And I just want to say, I don't think that the people representing council or county commissioners are directly compromised, because the city council members and county commissioners here are not directly receiving DOE funding. The DOE funding is really going to mostly one person, with a little bit of money going to a secondary person, and those are the people that are really guiding the narrative of this council, guiding the agendas, guiding the meetings, guiding the way that things are presented. So I'm not saying that you all are compromised, but the structure and the funding structure of this council is inherently compromised by a conflict of interest due to funding. So thank you all for hearing me today.
Thank you very much. Any questions that wanted to speak as well?
Morning again, Council. Chris Allred from Longmont. I would just like to say that I agree with Giselle's statement, and I think it was very well said. And I would also like to thank everyone on the council who spoke out this morning about the need for more public accessibility to these meetings. And so I just need to address this letter again, because this has to do with the budget. It is a key point in the discussion of the budget, because it has to do with the services from the executive director. And I say this in the sense of holding our government accountable, holding professionals accountable to their duty. And Mr. Abelson, I have to say that I've observed numerous times where I think that you've done a disservice to the public.
I want to make sure we focus on the budget. So I know we have opinions about people on the board or employees of the board, but please make sure the comments are focused on the budget.
Okay. Well, this has to do with the budget item that is going to the executive director. I believe it is a serious conflict of interest that has been going on since 2006, and we have seen evidence that there has been exclusion of public involvement. And I think that here, I will read a note from this letter. The first section, 3118, federal tenant, is to solicit and encourage public involvement. Instead of following this mandate, Mr. Abelson provides undefined engagement with a trajectory for exclusion of public involvement. And I honestly think that this morning was an example of that. When two people came here to present the need for more public involvement, Mr. Abelson, you then responded and framed it in a different way, framed it in a way as though we were saying that others on this council were having a conflict of interest.
I want to make sure, again, focus on the budget, not on the person.
All right. Why is it not in the budget? Why has it not been in the budget? Why is the public needing to demand that this board follow its federal mandate for public participation? That is not just for local government participation. That is for the public. That is for people to be able to know what's happening with the closure operations from the Rocky Flats plant. So that includes accessibility for the public to be able to attend. And we really need to see action on that, because that is, I would keep saying it, it is a federal mandate. That is, it's not a request, that is required by law. And so I think this council needs to, I urge this council to reject the budget as it's proposed, because it needs to have more funding allocated for public engagement, and this conflict of interest needs to be investigated further before more funding goes to an executive director. I said this same comment last year, very similar comment. I opposed the raise for the executive director. I opposed the DOE funding. I think this council needs to find another way where the public is allowed to participate, and when every time someone from the public stands up to say something, that it's not then framed in a different way by the executive director and diverted the attention.
I'm going to ask you to wrap up your comments.
Okay. All right, I hope I've made my point clear, and I hope this pattern has been playing out for years, I'd like to say. For anyone who's new to this council, there are many other citations I would like to give, and that's especially why this meeting needs to be recorded as well for the public record. So I'll just wrap up. I urge this council, please reject the budget, rewrite it to include an option for more public participation. I'm filming the meeting today. That is the job of our government. That is our government's duty to film this meeting. That is not the responsibility of the citizens. So,
thank you very much, I appreciate it.
all right. Thank you, everybody.
Are there any other members of the public that wish to provide comment on the budget? Okay, any other questions from the board?
Okay. Still feel pretty new to this council. So, my question has to do with whether there is just process-wise a way to amend the budget after it's been adopted. Just because I do think you've heard from members of council that we think it'd be good to explore some kind of option for remote participation by the public, and if that entails expense, would it be possible to look
Yes,
at the budget?
there's a process for amending a budget. It's very similar to the budget we're moving today.
Okay, great.
Any other questions from the board? All right, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing. Can I get a motion on the budget?
This is Kim Griffiths. I'll move for the budget to be accepted as written.
A second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? All right, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, please say nay. Budget is approved. Next item is new member selection. We have 4 people that have applied for membership to the Stewardship Council. And what order would you like to go in?
So we have 4 applicants. two that are sitting, Kim Griffiths and Cold War Museum. Cold War Museum's not here. Members of the public, Travis Cully, and then Herb Fenster, who's not here, unless Herb snuck in, but I don't think so. You guys know Kim, you know the Cold War Museum. I don't know if you have any questions for Kim. Obviously, Murph and Ken Freeberg are not here. They're usually regular attendees, so I'm not sure what happened there. And then what we usually do, Travis, is we give people who have not previously served, who are new to the board, an opportunity just to introduce yourself, take questions. And what we'll do for you is you'll come sit here, I'll move, and so you can address the board from the front of the room. And basically, what we want, Travis, is you just to spend a few minutes just talking about, your interests. This is obviously your second board meeting. You came to one executive committee meeting. Just anything you want, take 3 to 5 minutes, and then questions for Travis. So Kim, also, if there's anything that you wish to say, you can say it too. And so then what we'll do is we'll have a vote. Every government, and there are, I think, there's 9 of the 10 governments here today. You all will then each have 2 votes. And so you're basically voting on 2 of the 3 because Herb's not here. What we always have to guard against, we had an issue, I know Jeanette was here, I'm not sure if anybody else, Shelley was here, but an issue, Roman was here. There was a guy named Steve Franks who applied and was appointed before Kim was on the board. He came to 2 or 3 meetings, I don't know if you remember this, Pat, and then he disappeared. And so one of the things that's very important is that we know people are not going to disappear, because if someone disappears, as Steve Franks did, or Stephen Franks did, then we have an empty seat, but also we have a real quorum issue. So that's one thing that just to be mindful of as you vote is we have to make sure we can have people that are going to show up. Hence, with her never having come to a meeting and not showing up today, he doesn't, go through with the process then because he doesn't have an opportunity to address you. So if there's a tie for that second place after the first round of voting, then everybody will have 1 vote, and we'll choose between those 2 people. So that's the basic structure. Barb will record it, and it's not a secret ballot, it is an open ballot. So any questions about the process? Travis, if you have any questions, please let me know as well. But that's how the process will be. Only the governments are making the appointments. The non-governmental parties do not have a vote on this. So there will be 9 votes today. So
I'm going to record. I'm actually going to go, unless there's disagreement, alphabetically, because that's how I have to list them.
Let's start with the chair, and then vice chair. Chair, vice chair, and then alphabetical.
And then alphabetical.
So why don't we see if, Kim, you have anything, and then Travis, you'll come up here. Does that work? Do you have any questions about the process since you're new to it?
I'm still learning quite a lot. There might be information I get that even informs me about the position I'm bidding for. So I expect your patience and your candor. Thank you.
Kim, if you have anything, and then Travis, you'll come up here after Kim speaks.
All right, thank you, David. Hello, everyone. I think many of you know me, some of you don't because you're relatively newer members. My name is Kim Griffiths. I'm a resident of Arvada, Candelas specifically. My home backs up to Rocky Flats the Wildlife Refuge. So I am a local stakeholder. I live near Rocky Flats. I have been a member of this organization for, I believe I'm in my 6th year. I have attended all the meetings but one. I attend mostly all of the executive committee meetings. I've been very engaged within the committee, within the council structure, as well as outside of the structure, meeting with representatives from CDPHE and others who I have used over the years to inform myself of the issues of Rocky Flats historically as well as present day. I'm very engaged and involved. I have a very important voice on this Stewardship Council, and I would be honored for all of you to vote for me to continue. I think I'm an important voice on the council. I've demonstrated my engagement And I look forward to continuing on the Stewardship Council. Thank you.
Any questions for Kim? Devin?
Thanks. So I came up with a couple questions I wanted to ask each of the community partners. So you get the first shot at those. What do you believe the communities surrounding the Rocky Flat Stewardship Council have gained by your participation?
Well, I believe that I've tried to look at all perspectives. I've attended symposiums from activist groups as well as met with neighbors and officials within Candelas to talk about Rocky Flats issues. I've been a part of a voice in the Candelas community, holding several meetings that informed the community about Rocky Flats issues. I'm a co-author of a website that presents factual, peer-reviewed information about Rocky Flats, and I feel that's been my contribution.
Great. And you may have just answered this, but how do you disseminate information to the public you gain from the Rocky Flats Stewardship Council?
Primarily the website, but I am the contact person within the Candelas community for Rocky Flats issues. I meet with the community managers periodically to update them and inform them, and if should there be any questions, they confer with me, or else, you know, we have not had much questions or activity, certainly COVID and beyond, as well as now. I really don't get much questioning from the community. But should there be a question, they would refer to me.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I have one as well that I was going to ask everybody. What do you think is the purpose of this council?
The purpose is to monitor the remedy, continue to have local active government involvement in the issues regarding Rocky Flats, to listen to one another, to hear perspectives from everyone. But then, in my opinion, at the end of the day, you have to determine if you're going to accept the data and information that's provided by our contractors, whom I always want to thank very much. Lindsay from CDPHE, and I don't remember the alphabet soup of the new RTS, NTEC, or help me, folks. RSI.
Can't remember.
It was easier when it was Navarro. It was much easier, but you know, RSI. I have met with several of you individually. I have asked numerous questions. I've always gotten a complete and prompt answer to any question I asked, and I thank you all for your expertise, your knowledge, and your contributions, because I think you are the frontline people who are guarding our public safety, and for that I thank you. That's what I think the role is.
Thank you very much. All right, last call for questions for Kim. All right, Travis, would you like to come up?
Well, yeah, David, just feel comfortable. I don't need to take your seat or nor question your sense of theatrics.
No, we always do this, please.
You guys, okay, because I would love to sit right there.
I'm a creature of habit, Travis.
Okay, I've learned that. Hello, everyone. In brief, the skinny of my considerations today, my thoughts today, you have to have someone on this council whose post is best served by speaking up for those who've been left, for whatever reason or in whatever way, out of this conversation. I'm going to say a number of things. Just to start us off, I look forward to the question and answer period because I've got no idea what to expect there. I am a local resident. I was raised in Arvada. I went to Swanson Elementary School just south of 72nd Avenue. In 1979, my father came home from work. He was, and I try to describe this, white as a milk jug and sweating. It was still daylight, and the sun was just setting over the mountains. He said to me, in a tone he'd never used before, I was a child. He spoke to me like a man. He said, if they ever ask you where the toxic waste is, and I would come to, you know, require, and let's say, I've learned to give stewardship to my childhood memories. They're the most important thing to me. And so this little reflection comes from 49 years of healing. I want to share that with you. My notes have gotten discombobulated, so now I've got to go on improvisation. Here we go. We lived between Ingalls and Ingalls, south of 72nd. 8 months after the Marshall Fire took place, on December 30th of December 2021, 8 months after that fire, I woke up one day and I said, we've got this whole thing wrong. I woke up with my father's voice in my ear. And I finally realized what he told me. He saw people dumping in Marshall Lake. Now I come to these meetings. And in these meetings, I've observed a tendency of not recognizing causal events. I've got a series of causal events that I think that this panel has, or this council has ignored, even in my short time here. And this cuts to the root of what I have to say. If you as a group have come together to deny the likelihood of a causal relationship to fires in the region, then I think this group has completely abandoned its purpose. And my respect to all the technicians who do the oversight from the legacy management and from well, George and everyone from legacy management at the DOE, because I think that you don't have your arms around this problem. It would be a little bit of ludicrous to say that this panel here has their arms around the plutonium out there. We have to look, I was in art, and we have to look at this like a museum sort of situation. What have we really done? We've created an Earth-like place for plutonium to live on Earth, and it's right there. And we try to manage it like it's a lion in a cage, but the cage doesn't work. And I think it's appalling that we have a 15-year history trying to mobilize the Cold War Museum, when the Cold War Museum's timeline history actually, in 1984, ignores the time in which John Lipsky walks up into the plant with a warrant. That's not on Murph Woodfield's timeline. And I think that that's concerning about some of the subjectivity behind the institutions that, pardon me, but parade in public voices. One of the things I think this election offers us is an opportunity to elect individuals finally, to speak for themselves on this council, who are not burdened by their appropriate oaths of office. And if we have individuals on this council who have the freedom to speak from conscience, then I think this conversation can go somewhere. I think that I'm here to give this conversation direction and to point to the fact that we have meta factors to consider where it concerns plutonium that we have systematically and institutionally ignored. About human behavior. Dave Abelson is an enigmatic guy, but the last thing he is impartial. Nor is he consistent. In the meeting from last September 2022, this was apparently gone over in the meeting overview and protocols. All people speaking must refrain from public attacks and address the issues at hand. I hope you know I'm trying to do that. I hope not to see menacing behavior in this room again. But there are rumors that this conversation has gone far enough in that its practice of excluding the public has diminished the results here. I want to help. I'm on track again. I speak the truth. I speak from conscience. Please refer to my statement of interest. I understand that this is a volunteer opportunity. I'd love to help. I'd love to participate. I see its purpose. I will give you my best work. I'm likely to disagree with David Abelson on many things. I hope he doesn't take it personal, nor do you. I also see room for improvements in the activities of the board. I'm the resident in the room with new ideas. There are double standards I see for individuals who are voted into or appointed into chairs like these at the Stewardship Council. All of these definitions, I hope you understand, are becoming more and more flexible over the years. In September 11th of 2017, this council decided to drop the definition of stewardship from the IGA amendments. Looking over the website, I see a host of incomplete analyses. I question your metrics. You're not considering the meta factors. But here's a meta factor. If we were to say Fukushima, which melted down in 2011, had no effect on us because we can't see any sign of it there, we'd be ignoring the meta factors, right? If we say there's, perfect remediation there in Fukushima, we realize with some perspective the limits of what that means. On the eve of the Marshall Fire, this council passed the 5th five-year review without any recommended changes. 2 months later, the Marshall Fire took place. So we have to consider whether or not this conversation is pertinent to the environment, to global warming and other subjects it tries to contain. Don't be offended. You need oversight. Beirut. We had a Beirut moment on December 30th, and everyone on this council who ignores that fact contradicts the mission of this council. I want to help correct that. What this conversation is doing is hardly minimizing risk. It is busy dispersing harm onto unsuspecting families and individuals who don't even know that they are downwind. More can be done, more must be done. Vote how you will. The insular approach of the Stewardship Committee that it has maintained is defeatist. This conversation needs to be proactive. I aim to create that. This conversation can open an emergency response plan for radioactive events. This added security, willfully contributed to the current trends of fire retardation and fire control, may be the only way the Stewardship Council can present itself responsibly. This is how the Stewardship Council should give definition to itself and save face. And we do not need a museum that ignores the FBI raid. Protect Coloradans from radioactive fires in the region, please. I'm here to remind you of the rules of decorum in public meetings, to encourage you all to approach this conversation, because we are live now, with sincerity and a sense of humor. And I am here to battle. Don't shoot the messenger. You do not have your arms around this problem. And Kim, that's not a dispersion, that is a fact. You can all be complicit to limiting this conversation to LSO, non-LSO, COU, POU, but there's a whole world outside this which you're ignoring. Metafactors. We need to start using the word forensics. Humans on Earth are expected to live up to a few basic responsibilities, and that's what I hope that we can together do. But by ignoring the possibility of contamination off-site, this organization cannot be called prepared or responsible. I'm almost done. If it is determined that there is a connection, who will be accountable? Like Marx, I wouldn't be a part of a group that would have me. Groucho Marx. Like David, I am compelled to be here, on the island from which none shall ever escape. You need individuals who will speak truth to power at risk to self, and this I'll pledge to you. Saying that you have no demonstrable conflict of interest in any scenario here is really not enough to guarantee free speech. We need fewer people on this board with hybrid motivations. Kim Griffiths, bless her heart, has attended every meeting since her appointment in 2007, -1. From 2018 to 2023, she has exhibited a conflict of interest every day that she sat here. Make the statement today to have fewer interested institutions and developers vying over the memory of this inhospitable place. Like Wes McKinley says, it's not about what I say. I'm here to listen, because this position is about representation. This is about decency, a true concern for public health, and engaging the public on the record. Your questions?
I'll open up the board for questions.
Well, since my
No,
name
no, no,
was.
no, 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 no,
Nope.
no.
Oh,
It's only elected
Only
officials.
elected.
oh, okay.
Sorry.
Devin?
Thank you. So I have one additional question that I asked Kim, just because I don't know this for you. How long have you attended meetings of the Rocky Flat Stewardship Council? And you mentioned causal events that we had ignored. If you'll put that in place as well, what events you would say?
My first meeting was September 19th of 2022. I'm particularly pointing to the retraction of the FBI raid in Murph Widowfield's timeline of events that you see on his website for Old War Museum. If you look at 1984, there are 3 things that happen, and none of them say John Lipsky. And that's a causal event for this conversation. You know, we have to look at this in big context, right? In 1984, June 6th, look at this. So who was here for the June 6th meeting of 2022? I missed it. Was that virtual? Did anyone mention that June 6th was the anniversary of the FBI raid? On June 6th, did anyone memorialize the fact that the FBI raid is what brought you all here to this conversation? Devin, that's what I'm pointing to.
And then what do you believe the community surrounding Rocky Flat Stewardship Council will gain by your participation?
A spirit of openness, the opportunity to hear from people who have no representation. I kind of think that my position, if I were to be elected to hold this position, would be that of airing and considering voices that haven't been represented. I've said that in my initial statement, but that comes to who I am as opposed to what I've seen. I've seen Marshall Road catch fire, and I'm concerned about that. I think this body has some responsibility to that. And I think that a column of activity needs to be developed in our regular protocols so that we can, in a proactive way, in a public-facing way, support emergency services so that they know that there is a history of radioactivity in the area, that fires in the area may be radioactive, that plutonium dust clouds that erupt from a field of wind could become flammable, turning into a Marshall Fire-like event. And it's a matter of the combustibility of the region that this council seems to be not living up to its budget. I think appropriations need to be made, and that presentation, public PR needs to be created so that fire patrols, fire marshals know not to immediately consider all fires to be conquerable by water. We understand this about plutonium, and we should be informing people in the area. Instead of a museum, we should be putting out handbills that say, don't fight fires with water. And we need to be supplying the fire stations with the correct CO2 retardants that they need to fight these fires. That's our job. And I hope my position and this opportunity to open up some of these ideas that have never been considered.
Then my last question for you, how do you plan to disseminate information to the public that you gained from the Rocky Flat Stewardship Council?
That's a fair question. I have a Twitter page that I have 43 followers on, and I leave my thoughts there. I participate in the Peace and Justice Center meetings, in which, I don't do anything in the way of dissemination, but this is more me opening up, the basilica of how I receive information. My own personal position in the world as a citizen, as an activist, is to listen to other people. I'm like a Studs Terkel, and I'm going to say things that are going to be poetic and metaphorical, and they're going to probably upset some people who are rigorously scientific. However, when we're dealing with the difference between what is and how people feel, what's actually there, and the subjective condition about avoiding it or acknowledging it, it's a fine art of rhetoric to be able to bring our attention to the way forward in a public conversation.
Any other questions from the board? I have a couple, actually. The one I asked earlier, what do you think the purpose of this board is?
The Stewardship Council is to provide some public opportunity to see over the Legacy Management Agreement. The Legacy Management Agreement needs public engagement. And the concern that we have, and the stress, the tension in the room, really comes down to whether or not the Stewardship Council is fulfilling the legacy management objectives.
And then you mentioned that you run a Twitter site. Is this the local awareness about Rocky Flats
Yes,
Twitter site?
new Club Boulder. Join anytime.
So a couple of days ago, you posted that the Rocky Flats Stewardship Council needs to be dissolved. So why do you want to be part of an organization that you think shouldn't exist?
Well, exactly because the objective is, well, let's first of all, let me answer one question at a time. I'm not citing the letter that Chris dropped off. I'm citing the letter that Ketterter and Abels and Lipsky wrote of October 24th, last week. There was a letter that you guys received calling for defunding of this organization. And I think that that is warranted if the metaphor presiding over what this group has done is that it has provided horse blinders, separating and distracting our communities from being able to work together. And if that's what it's done, the most unconscionable prospect of all has occurred, the Marshall Fire. In some way, I'm planning the elder, trying to say that the Marshall Fire may take place, that Mount Vesuvius could erupt. And I am saying that because with plutonium it can rekindle, it can erupt again. And so I, as Pliny the Elder, I'm just trying to speak to you, people from Pompeii, because I'm a concerned human being.
Any other questions from the board? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, so I think at this time we have the opportunity to make our selections. Unless there are any additional questions for either of those that are here today.
And are there any board questions about the process?
Yeah, I have a question about process. So we're considering all four for the 2 seats, correct?
Correct. We can consider all 4. The recommendation is to consider 3.
Okay. But we had 4 applicants then, correct? Okay.
And so when you're, oh, go ahead, sorry.
I have a process question as well. Northland's director is not here. Does that mean I vote?
Correct.
Thank you for that.
So it's just the
So
local
I
government,
assumed-
if the government is not present, the alternate for the local government.
And the one thing that I mentioned, because you're not officially designated as an alternate for Golden, we, instead of 10 votes, we have 9. Which I know you don't take personally.
All right, so when your government is called on, then you'll give your top 2 choices. And I believe I get to go first. Yes. So I am going to nominate the Cold War Museum as well as Kim Griffiths. I've had lots of conversations with Murph and with Ken over the years, and their participation is extremely important to document the history of what's happened. We can argue semantics on what's on their website and what isn't. I think that can be further conversation. But Ken in particular and I sat down and talked not too long ago just about how that history is being lost because just the members are aging out. So there's a concern there that we will lose that history. And so I very much would like to keep that as part of this organization. And similar with Kim, someone who lives in a community that is directly impacted by what could potentially be coming from Rocky Flats, and bringing a voice for that community to this council is not a conflict. Just like all of us are elected to represent people, appointing someone that lives in that neighborhood is very important. So I will nominate the Cold War Museum and Kim Griffiths.
Next is Broomfield as vice chair.
Great, so I would like to nominate Kim Griffiths. I think that you've attended all the meetings and you do bring a voice that is important to our group. I was really impressed with Herb's application. I'm disappointed that he is not here today to answer further questions. So because of that, I'm going to nominate the Cold War Museum as the second nomination.
Going back to alphabetical order, Arvada is next.
So that's me.
Yep. One person from Arvada.
I will be nominating both Kim Griffiths and the Rocky Flats Cold War.
Going down the list, City of Boulder.
I'm the staff member, alternate, and for the City of Boulder, I nominate the Rocky Flats Cold War Museum and Kim Griffiths. Thank you for your comments today, Kim. Appreciate it.
Boulder County.
Yeah, clearly County Commissioner. I'll go along with the two nominations that have been made. However, I would like to just say that I think by having somebody from the Rocky Flats Cold War Museum participate on this council shouldn't be seen by the public or anybody as an endorsement and support of their version of history. I don't know whether it's complete or incomplete, but I think that a member of an organization whose mission is to preserve the history, I think is important to have on this council, and somebody who lives in a community directly downwind, who is a spokesperson for that community as well.
Your two votes were Kim and
the Rocky Flats Cold War.
Thank you. Golden does not have a delegate. Jeffco?
Jefferson County, Rocky Flats Cold War Museum and Kim.
North Glen?
Rocky Flats Coal Museum and
Superior?
I appreciate all the applicants for putting in their applications and for being willing to serve. In particular, I appreciate the past service of the Cold War Museum and of Kim. I think that organizations like councils every now and then need new blood. So Superior is going to vote for Travis Cully and Herb Pence.
Westminster.
Westminster will be voting for Cold War Museum and for Kim, and as has been stated before too, is that the fact that the Cold War Museum participates does in no way make it the prima facie timeline of what has happened. It is their opinion there, it is a public opinion, but we value and sadly losing that history would I think hurt this board.
That is all the votes I have captured, which tallied is a vote of 8 votes in favor of Kim. The next tie is 8 votes in favor of the Cold War Museum, and then 1 vote for Travis and 1 vote for her.
So do we need a motion then for those two that have the highest votes? Or is that considered?
I believe that would be the votes speak for themselves, and you have elected Kim and Murph Widowfield on behalf of the Cold War Museum, or their representative, to serve as your two members on the Stewardship Council.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Travis, for applying to the board. Hopefully see you in the future. Next item is the DOE quarterly meeting.
Who's doing the overview presentation for you guys?
We have just let's still with the 2 short slides. So I'm going to do all the different sections. My name is George Squibb. I've been here for decades and decades. I'm the surface water lead at the site, and I work for RSI. I'll be going over stuff for groundwater and ecology, but I would recommend that if you have questions about that, you don't ask me. You ask John Boylan in groundwater or Karen McShay for the ecology. And I think we're going to go to like a discussion after this?
Yeah, what we're going to do is, as soon as this overview is over, then we're just going to have board wrap up, and we'll close the circle, and whoever wants to say, or close the U-shape, whoever wants to say, we're going to do a group discussion. And if that's of length, it's of length. If it's quick, it's quick.
Okay. And so most of you know we do quarterly and annual reports as part of the legacy management agreement at Rocky Flats, part of our stewardship and maintenance. So I would always encourage you to go and read those reports because there's a lot more in there than I can possibly cover in 2 slides or even in a discussion here. And reading those things, especially ahead of time, helps you formulate your questions so that you get to answer them more effectively. So always encourage you to go to read those reports. And sometimes they're kind of long, especially John's stuff. I mean, you know, groundwater's boring, we all know this. But, so anyway, I really encourage you to go there and read this. So this is for the 2nd quarter, so that is, what is that? That is April, May, and June of this year, which was quite dry for the spring compared to normal for us. For surface water, all of our points of compliance, the water quality was acceptable and there were no reportable conditions. For our points of evaluation, which are our locations that are upstream of our points of compliance, GS10 and SW093, 2 of them we had acceptable water quality. At our SW027, which is our point of compliance on the south intercept ditch, which is downstream of the former 903 pad and lip area, we did have a reportable condition for plutonium, and it was for May and June of 2022. But I'll point out that we do a 12-month rolling average, so that's a moving window of data. And the reason why we had reportable for this year, we had no flow at that location, so I collected no new samples. However, as we go back in time, there's only what makes up the average is the last result from 2021. So basically, it's sort of an echo, if you will, of what we measured in 2021, flowing off that location. So, and our response to this this current report condition is going to be covered is also covered in a contract record that is available on the website. So we can talk about that when we get into the question and answer. For our quarterly sampling, our performance sampling of the present landfill treatment system, we did have a lab mistake this quarter. And what we do is we have to measure SVOCs at that location, but because we need to get low enough detection limits to be able to compare the numbers against what's on our list of standards, we use 2 different methods for our SVOCs, and the lab didn't run one of the methods. They took our 2 bottles that we sent and they ran them both on a single method. So what that meant is we didn't get results for this quarter for 8 constituents. I will tell you that for those 8 constituents, they've never, at that location, never ever, since closure, been measured over the standard. In fact, most of them have not been detected above the detection limits. So we work with our labs and make sure that they don't make mistakes, so they've been put on notice, and it's all part of our audits of the labs to make sure these kinds of things don't happen. Performance monitoring for the original landfill in Woman Creek showed that all the VOCs and mercury, which are collected as grabs, were fine. However, during When we produced the report, the last composite sample for that quarter hadn't been completed. We had wells, and I think that's 88 wells, so they were busy. We did the routine treatment system maintenance. The PTS discharge gallery was finished. These galleries, they're subsurface discharge galleries, and we do periodic maintenance on them to make sure that they're working properly. So that was a routine maintenance event. We did some plumbing modifications at the FSP-PTS to facilitate the pilot testing, which is starting, I think, pretty soon here. John can talk to that. And this testing will start in the fourth quarter of 2022. Uh-oh. Can I go?
That's right.
It just looks like the first slide. In terms of operations and maintenance, we did the routine central outboard unit inspections. We had 2 weather-related inspections. We do those when we get an inch of rain or more in a 24-hour period, and we saw nothing unusual. We also did the monthly inspections at the OLF, and everything was fine. We did quarterly inspections at the present landfill. Everything was fine. Landfill monument surveys were within acceptable design limits. And we do the usual erosion control monitoring and maintenance. And at the North Walnut Creek slump, we did surveys, continued to survey the monitoring points to quantify any kind of movement that's happening there. For ecology, it's a variety of wildlife monitoring, including nest box surveys and looking at prairie dog surveys. And there were no active towns, no active prairie dog towns within the central operating unit. Various vegetation monitoring, wetland surveys, weeds, things like that, also completed. We do vegetation management to promote the kind of plants, native plants that we want at the site. That includes things like interseeding, weed control. During the third quarter, during the second quarter, Karen was getting ready for the third quarter stuff, of course. She's always getting ready for the next thing. And that includes some re-veg monitoring, wetland monitoring, other activities. Things like getting ready for going into winter. That's it. 2 slides. I talked longer than I could have.
Any question on this section?
How's the L curve?
Well, I don't like the L curve because they bump into my things and break things. But yeah, it was busy in the fall out there. Lots of noise. So I haven't even. I mean, we'll probably just have more out next year.
Lots of youngsters too.
Yeah.
We're just taking questions from the board right now. Devin?
Yeah, so with the slumping that's happening at the landfill, there was a note.
Excuse me? Where?
The slumping at the landfill, is that correct?
We have an active slump at the North Walnut Creek. Our
Perfect.
landfills are fine.
Thank you. So I believe that, and correct me if I'm wrong now because I may have misread it. So there was regrading. Was there regrading at that, or is that the regrading that happened at the landfill?
Do you want to speak to that, Harry? I'm not sure the schedule of those activities.
Yeah, the regrading that's done is done on the North Walnut Creek slump.
Okay.
So what we have is we have kind of a crack that has run across it that has been there. We did a lot of, I would say cosmetic work in about 2017 to promote just sheet flow across it so we don't have a lot of infiltration of water. And along that crack, we have 11 stakes set up on the south side and 11 stakes set up on the north side. The idea being we go out, periodically measure them, and that way we can tell how much, not displacement, but how much vertical movement we have on that. So at the same time we measure those, we go out and do some minor regrading. It can be a drag behind a little skid steer. In some cases, it's just a hand rake or whatever. We just need to kind of feather that grade out so it's all consistent. And in doing so, I believe the last time we got 11, or not 11, but 7 stakes were kind of disrupted. And we have control points set up for a survey. We know where those stakes go, what their elevation was, so then we go out and reset those, and then the process just continues after that.
Okay, thank you for that. And so there was major regrading that was done in 2017. What would be the kind of the trigger point at which there would need to be more, kind of substantial regrading happening at that slump?
I think what we have, what we would think of as substantial movement, I think 2017, these guys, being John or George may know better, but we had a scarp face that was maybe 8-10 foot tall. It was significant. And in order to do that, we wanted to basically level it out. We wanted to take that top side where those pressures were pushing soil down and remove some of the dirt from that top, and then just bring it back to a normal grade. I don't think we have a trigger in mind. I don't think there's any piece of paper we have that says if it drops by 5 foot, we're gonna go out and do something. We monitor it. I think it's a subjective call, and I think we're being very proactive. We're going out there monthly looking at the data points, and whenever we do see any sort of cracking reoccur, we go out and fill those. And we are monitoring piezometers on the site. I believe in the second quarter, we had 1/10 of a foot where we had a vertical displacement. And since 2017, over that entire lineation that I was talking about, that crack, we've had 4 to 6 foot of movement on that. And that, of course, is in a kind of a rotating slump block. So the back of it wants to drop down and the front of it wants to push forward. And as a result of that, we have to keep an eye on our road we maintain. And there's a riffable well at the bottom of that that is also, well, I would say it's at risk or at some point in time may be. And we're trying to come up with solutions or like-for-like replacement or whatever we feel like we may need to do to replace any infrastructure, critical infrastructure. And by that I mean that which contributes to our collection of water on that site for treatment. We look at that and we kind of keep it in mind, go out and fix it as we need to.
We have a geotechnical subcontractor that we've been using to help us make our decisions. Maybe you can speak to that, Dana?
Tetra Tech is a geotechnical company that we have, and we also have a geotechnical person on staff. The grading and et cetera we do to promote water drainage off the hill. Any cracks that we find, we try to fill those so the water doesn't permeate down into the hillside and loosen its structural integrity. Essentially, we're monitoring that hillside because on top we do have the collection trench for the SPPTS, and that's our main concern. We want the hillside stable, but it's not part of our remedy. Our remedy is the Solar Ponds Plume Treatment System collection trench, and then we worry about that.
Well, it sounds like that. I mean, the site still isn't necessarily stable. I mean, that's what it shows me.
The whole property's not. This is stable. You know, I mean, slumping is a geologic process. This was an area that was filled, so it's more susceptible to that, and that's why we're watching.
Right.
Yep.
And as I was saying, it's not stable. I'm glad that the data is being gathered to ensure that we are monitoring that. So thank you for that.
Any other questions from the board?
I know this is a future question, but I think those on the board who have not done the tour, which were suspended during COVID, if we're able to resume those next June, I strongly encourage you to do it. It's so insightful to see this and have the folks explain the solar ponds and all of that. I found it extremely useful.
Any other questions? So we have a public discussion after we close out the meeting, and so we'll hold the public questions for that time to have some dialogue at that point. All right, we'll move on to the next item. Of course, my agenda is closed. Thank you very much.
Just to reiterate as we transition back, we're in a phase of experimentation here with these quarterly reports. You know, we used to get these 45-minute, hour quarterly reports. We're now trying to shorten them so that, you know, you get 2 slides, you get the top line items, and then you can have more discussion from there. So what we'll do then, once we get through this last part of the meeting, is we will officially close the meeting. We will continue, anybody who wants then to continue, we're gonna sort of close, we'll see how many people leave. We're gonna invite members of the public and agency, Lindsay and others to sit at the table and have a roundtable discussion. So what we're really trying to do is, give you the top line items and then increase engagement through a roundtable discussion.
All right, so big picture or any additional items? Everybody have a copy of the big picture?
Okay. Big picture at the end of the last meeting, just in terms of items to watch, I can't remember who offered it. I want to say Randy, but it may not have been, to add the multi-purpose building and then also the air quality monitoring. So you'll see those on future issues to watch. Those have been added. The February meeting is very straightforward, very standard, right? You set up the business of the organization at the first part of the year by electing the 2023 officers and passing a resolution on meeting. And then we have the DOE quarterly update. I have a TBD. We'll see if there's something additional that we should be discussing at that time. April, I don't have a clue yet. It's just too far out really to see what we should be discussing in April, but we will have certainly ample time to be able to figure that out. So the stuff that I know is on the big picture, but there's some question marks, as there usually is this time of year when you're trying to project that far out. So anyway, not a lot to say at this point, but we'll refine it with the executive committee as we get closer to the meetings. And if there's anything in particular now that you're saying, hey, we really want to tee this up for the first part of next year, let's hear that. Just a couple of reminders. Some of the downstream communities will be talking with DOE in the coming month about PFAS. We'll see if there's anything that emerges from there. And then obviously DOE wants to meet to talk about the requests that came in from Arvada and from Broomfield and now from Boulder County about air quality monitoring in case there's a fire. So those things, there's stuff going on that that we're sort of tracking, and then we'll see whether or not those, are something that we end up bringing to the board, and if so, at what point.
Any questions on the big picture? All right, any updates from the municipalities or members? All right, well, we will adjourn this part of the meeting. For those members of the public that want to stick around to have dialogue, members of the board that want to stick around to have dialogue around the daily quarterly report, you are welcome to join us at the table.
So why don't we break for about 5 minutes? We'll sort of see who stays, who goes, and we'll figure out if we're going to rearrange the room. And we'll go from there. I'm not calling on anybody, but I'm going to violate that first rule. Since Chris Allred had a question during the last session, I'm going to ask him to start. We're going to go as long as there are questions. If we get one question and that's it, then we're stopping in however long it takes to answer the question. So open conversation, open engagement. It's an experiment. We'll try it for a few meetings, see how it works, and if we're finding that it doesn't sort of garner the type of thing we're looking for, then we'll move to plan C. So Chris, why don't you start with your question, and then we'll take it from there. And again, I'm not calling on people other than asking Chris to start.
Does everyone know everybody here?
Yeah, let's do a round table.
Yeah. Especially Sean.
Sean, why don't you start, and we'll go to Travis next.
Yeah, so Sean Michaelberger, I'm with the Department of Energy. I'm basically the assistant, or I guess deputy, to the site manager, who's Andy Kine, who most of you know. And I think I mentioned earlier, he's just on a well-deserved vacation, so I'm attending in his place today.
Travis Cully, Boulder County.
Hi, I'm Chris Allred from Longmont.
John Boylan, RSI. I'm the groundwater lead for the site.
Carrie McShay, RSI. I'm the ecologist at the site.
Jake Moyer, City of Arvada staff.
Roman Kohler, Rocky Flats Homesteaders. We're the retirees from Rocky Flats.
Devin Schaff, council member of City and County of Broomfield.
Randy Warman, council member, City of Arvada.
Melissa Weekly with the Stewardship Council.
David Abelson with the Stewardship Council.
Summer Laws, staff for Boulder County.
Harry Bolton, RSI, project manager.
Jeanette Hillary, League of Women Voters.
George Squibb, RSI. I'm a service corps lead and I hope to be retired from Rocky Flats. Counting the years.
Couple of years, that's good.
Okay.
Yeah,
Years.
that's not good years.
Months.
Kim Griffiths, resident of Candelas, Arvada.
Ryan Wisniewski with RSI. I'm the environmental compliance lead for the site.
Shelley Stanley, staff for the City of Northwood.
Trina Nance, staff for the City of Westminster.
Caleb Owen, City of Thornton.
Lindsay Merle, Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment.
Well, thank you for the opportunity for this roundtable discussion. I just had a question during the DOE quarterly review, and another question also after the big picture update at the end. So the first question was regarding the reportable condition of plutonium. I was wondering if we could please be reminded of the protocol for what happens when there's a reportable condition. And also, the second question is about the meeting regarding air monitoring. And I'm wondering why that hasn't been formally announced to the public. Isn't that something that is a part of the Rocky Flats Legacy Management Agreement on public involvement, that should be a meeting that is open to the public? So I'd like to know a little bit more about that meeting regarding air monitoring, because I know that that is something that local stakeholders have expressed interest in for some time now.
So for reportable conditions under the RFMA, there are various kinds of reportable conditions. So the response to the different reportable conditions is prescripted in the RFMA. So you can read the RFMA on our website. You can see that. So for like a water quality reportable condition, there are initial notifications that get made to regulators and couple of selected local governments that are downstream communities essentially. Then what we go into is the DOE puts together a proposal on the path forward to address the reportable condition. That goes to CDPHE and EPA because they are the other two RFMA parties. And then we have a meeting and a consultation where DOE, EPA, and CDPHE, including our site contractors who are the technical staff, and we go over the particulars of what we measured, how we measured it, other things that are related. We look at past data, historical data that are collected even from projects outside of routine referral monitoring to get an understanding of what the reportable condition is. Basically a trigger, but there's much more to the evaluation. So we bring in, we evaluate the situation, and then with the referral parties will put together what we call a contact record, which describes that meeting, and then we develop a path forward is developed to address the reportable condition. And so that's basically how that process works for a water quality reportable condition.
What would be an example of a path forward for
So,
response?
So for instance, for this SW027 reportable condition in 2021, in the drainage area that where the water is that's tributary to SW027, which is the location where we have the reportable plutonium, there is residual low-level plutonium contamination in the soils that was left over mostly from the 903 pad. The vast majority of the material that was there was remediated and removed from the site, but there's still low-level contamination. It's below the soil action levels that were part of the cleanup process, but it can still, if enough of it were removed under certain conditions, we can see it in the water. And that's why we do the long-term water monitoring, so that we can make sure that the water is acceptable. So in that particular case, the way to reduce the transport of the plutonium, of the residual plutonium, is to make sure that the soil doesn't move, or it moves at a slow enough rate. So we, as part of that contact record, and there's also the dispute resolution that goes with that contact record between, because CDPHE originally wanted to do something a little different, so DOE and CDPHE worked it out, and we now have a contact record and dispute resolution for what happened in 2021, and it includes doing enhanced erosion controls, promotion of ground cover, things like that.
If you look online, contact record 2021-03 describes that dispute resolution, the outcome, and those materials are attached.
So that's an example. In the past, we've done additional monitoring. We've increased the frequency of our monitoring. We do shorter turnaround times so we can get the data quicker. All of these things go towards looking at the longer term effects of what we see in water quality, and whether or not it actually poses a hazard to public health in the environment.
And to clarify a little bit on what George is saying, part of the consultation is to develop the appropriate response. It doesn't necessarily mean that an action is going to be taken to address the reportable condition. If other actions are already in place, the appropriate response may be not to do anything in addition to this reportable condition because there are measures that are already being taken, or the variance in the data is so small relative to everything, but we'll continue to track it and maybe have a follow-up meeting, but it does not necessarily mean some sort of remedial action or something of that nature would take place.
Thank you for your response.
This conversation is focused solely on the DOE quarterly report, but I'm going to address your question. There was a few governments that wrote letters to the Department of Energy and said, hey, we have concerns, and it was focused on air quality, establishing a baseline, and the potential for fire. 3 governments said so far. There's all sorts of meetings that go on that are, communities meet with DOE. They're not Stewardship Council meetings. They're outside the purview of the Stewardship Council. And that's just par for the course. Those have gone on long before the Legacy Management Agreement was adopted in 2006. And so that air quality monitoring, DOE reached out to those governments and said, hey, we want to talk with you. We want to talk with the governments. And so they're having a meeting. I know the League of Women Voters is in the process of putting together a letter as well. And so they'll be there as well. So it's just along those lines. We can make those letters available. If you have an interest, just shoot me an email and I'll send them to you. That'll be just an easier reminder. And that way I'll make sure that I have your correct email, because I'm sure I do, because I know you're on our distribution list, but if you could just email me and remind me, that would be helpful. Other questions other things about the quarterly report? Jump in.
I actually have a question.
Can you just speak up a
Yes.
little bit? There's a fan above me that makes it very difficult.
Could you go, George mentioned the, I know, it's like trying to creep out in a car, right? Can you go over the new contact record for SW027, what's going to be done?
The 2021-03 that took a while to
Yes,
to get out.
Lindsay, will you explain where SW027 is?
Yes, so if you envision Rocky Flats as a square, and then in the center there's the central operable unit, you have 2 major drainages, north and south. SW027 is towards the southeast corner of the coup. It is not on the boundary, it is before the terminal pond, kind of at the bottom of the hillside that George was talking about. That's the monitoring point.
It's on Woman Creek.
Sorry?
It's not on Woman Creek.
It is.
It's on the South Interceptor Ditch, which is tributary to C2, which then becomes tributary to Woman Creek,
Right.
upstream of the point of compliance. So it's like on a tributary to Woman Creek.
Right.
So it's sort of at the base of the hillside before you get to the creek, if that makes sense. And it took some time to get through contact record 2021-03 because we did have dispute resolution for the first time, whereas George mentioned, we get a reportable condition, we decide, look at the data, figure out a potential response, a reaction, or work that needs to be done. In this case, there was a disagreement between DOE and CDPHE and EPA, We'd not been through dispute resolution before, so that finally wrapped up in July of this year. And the response is basically, we had wanted DOE to look at an expanded area of that hillside. So you've got the 903 pad, the hillside that then goes to the east boundary of the coup, and at the southeast corner, the surface water monitoring point. DOE wanted to look at the northwest portion of that hillside close to the former 903 pad, that general area. CDPHE and EPA wanted that expanded to the east. That was a point of disagreement. So the contact record, ultimately, the dispute resolution committee said, yes, look at an expanded area. For 5 years, you're going to do continued vegetation monitoring, aerial surveys, and then there will be continued water quality monitoring as per the norm. Did I miss anything,
So
Ryan?
no additional soil sampling in that expanded area?
No, but after 5 years, we can look at the data that's been collected, the new area that's been studied, and reevaluate going forward.
What kind of analysis happens over that 5 years?
I'll have to go back and look at the exact wording of the contact record. It will be, sort of the data will be reported in the annual report each year for the public, and at that point, we can look over the analysis, but.
Let me ask you differently. What is the data? It's
Aerial survey, looking at vegetation over an expanded area, really looking at this hillside closer to that point where you see those periodic reportable conditions for plutonium rather than over on just this little portion of the hillside. So qualitative.
And of course, we'll continue to monitor the surface water. And we have, as Lindsay likes to call it, the little place up on the corner that we monitor is GS51. And that, we've calculated, accounts for about 80% of the load compared to SW27. So we all know, I'm not saying you're wrong, but we all know that's the primary location. It's the closest to the former 903 pad. There is residual contamination over a much larger area. In fact, remediation occurred outside of the GS51 drainage area. But so that monitoring will continue, and we'll continue to track those loads, and that's the best way to track the performance of our actions is what's happening at the surface water location.
Does that provide some clarity?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
And at this point in time, is vegetation, not wattles? You're not proposing expansion of wattling, you know?
I don't think wattles were included in the dispute resolution committee.
What we are doing, we're looking at vegetation and bare ground. We're trying to see if there's areas of bare ground. So the aerial surveys help us look for areas of bare ground. And then what we're going to do this winter in the expanded area, because it's a good time for seeding, we're going to identify those bare ground areas or areas with lower or with higher soil, exposed soil. And we're going to try to seed, so using our standard seed mix. And then we're also going to be adding a wood straw, which is an erosion control. And then we'll collect data for from a vegetation standpoint. And then we're going to look at it again over the next 5-year period to see if that is holding in place, the wood straw is holding in place.
And we've already applied a lot of the wood straw already. We did that prior to actually the dispute resolution being complete. We did the actions, most of the actions for the wood straw, right?
Yes, in that original best management practice area. So now we're going to be doing the same thing in the expanded area.
And 5 years is a good length of time to determine whether vegetation is going to get established. So,
I mean, vegetation, it's vegetated, you know, it's just, you know, trying to, maximize. I mean, it's not, the hillside is not bare by any stretch, but it was hugely disturbed during the remediation. Most of the topsoil went away, and so it's taken long, it's more work to get the thickest, vegetation we can get.
And there's just areas naturally that, in a natural grassland setting, there's areas of bare ground.
Yeah.
So it's just.
Haven't you used that system before in revegetation areas when there's either been slumps or just other areas that needed enhancing? You've used that procedure with the straw and other.
The wood straw,
Yeah.
we have used in other areas. This is the first time we're using it. Oh, that's not true, I'm sorry. This is an additional time we're using it on the 903 area that flows into the SW027.
For different reasons, though.
Yeah,
Sometimes
it's different reasons,
part of
but.
a construction project and we
Yeah.
re-veg.
Yeah.
Just for a little bit of history, go ahead.
It also just promotes growth too. Promotes,
sorry, what?
the woodstock promotes a little bit of cover for the
Yes.
seeded species, and so promotes growth as well.
Especially on the south facing.
Yes, south-facing hillsides, yes.
Let me ask a quick question, and George and John will know what I mean, and others may not. This was the monitoring point Rick wanted, right?
50, yeah.
Which-
51, GS 51.
Was it 51
Okay.
or was it SW027?
No, 27 was
so,
already
to
in
give a
there.
little background, as part of the 903 pad remediation, we actually had gauging stations on all the little tiny drainages that come down the hillside. So we could monitor prior to that project and then during that project, so we could understand what each was contributing. GS 51, which was the furthest west and also closest to the former 903 pad area, most of this contamination, as most of you know, is windblown. So the higher concentrations were closer to where the original drums were stored, for instance. At closure, GS 51 was still running and operating. We may have had, I can't remember exactly, if we had a reportable, what wasn't a reportable condition then, we called in an exceedance right around that closure time frame or just before. And so it seemed prudent to keep that location running, GS 51, even though it wasn't required by the RFMA. And so there may have been some people that liked it, but also there was reasons to keep it. And we've kept it ever since because we have had, as everyone knows, we've had other reportable conditions at SW7, so we continue to operate it. Again, it doesn't flow. It flows maybe half every other year, two every 3 years. This year we had no water, nor do we have any water in the SID at SW027.
The reason I ask that is that historically speaking, if you go back and look at where was what during production days and during cleanup, if there was an area of the site that had the potential to have this kind of issue, this is it. And it was because of the 903 pad, which was an outside storage area of drums. Those drums were removed in, 69, something like that. And then they scraped the land, and that actually was one of the huge dispersal events for offsite contamination, was initial attempts back in the late 60s to remediate the 903 pad. And so it was an intense focus during cleanup was that area. And there was always a concern that there would be levels of there'd be some residual contamination up on the surface that could get mobilized and you'd see it through water quality testing. And so the thing to recognize is where they're seeing this is where we expected to, if we saw a problem, this is where one of the places where we expected to see it. So, which doesn't mean, okay, well, that's good. It just means that it is part and parcel with the thinking back in the day and why you focus certain monitoring points in certain locations.
And certain analytical suites.
Certainly.
Analytical suites are tailored to what we know about the drainage areas also.
And then the consultative process is basically, and these contact records was a mechanism for public understanding of what was going on between the different agencies as they're grappling with some of these issues. So, so that's helpful to continue to see that process play out.
And are we concerned with the vegetation? I mean, we're monitoring the vegetation to ensure that there aren't any bare areas, but is that just to prevent erosion, wind erosion, water erosion from those areas? Is that what it is, or is this to, better, stabilize that area?
Well, both. I mean, it's there to promote, try to reduce any kind of soil movement, which thereby then the constituents, the plutonium and the americium that are stuck to that soil want to move to. So it's also to provide better habitat. I mean, Karen does that across the whole site all the time, keeping a good ecosystem, because that's one of our goals. Yeah.
I mean, central to your question, Devin, is that one of the things that happened during cleanup was trying to understand what is the characteristic of the plutonium at Rocky. It's not soluble. It basically moves because it's attached to soil particles. That's how it mobilizes. And so revegetation is extremely important, because if you can slow down the water and reduce the movement of water, you can then slow down and reduce the movement of plutonium on the surface. And so that's really, understanding that actinide chemistry was a key feature for determining closure decisions and then post-closure management framework.
You can find that kind of stuff online too, if you really want to dig deep. The AME studies there. The RIFS is the huge data closure, remedial action document that has so much in it about the history of the site.
So I'm concerned about the soil disturbance in terms of like digging, and I understand there's going to be, are there plans to breach some dams, and how that could cause airborne soil that might have plutonium in to get into the air? Is there, what is the status on the digging and the breaching of the dams?
So are those two separate questions, the dams or any kind of digging?
Yeah, because isn't there's other digging happening at the landfill maybe, and other places too?
So we have institutional controls that limit things like digging, and any kind of project that required digging goes through a consultative process with the regulators to make sure that it is an appropriate action that we need to be doing the digging, and then various controls would be applied, dust controls, personal protection, whatever, and we look at where the digging is going to happen, how deep it's going to go. You can see there's example contact records on the website where this has happened in the past, and then I believe we have there's a 10-day public.
Yeah, so depending on what it is, we have the institutional controls, and those are on record as an environmental use restriction on record with Jefferson County, that you can find those. Those restrictions are also identified within the Rocky Flats Legacy Management Agreement. For certain institutional controls, anytime we're looking to violate those, so an example of one is digging below 3 feet. We go into consultation with the other referendum parties, so CDPHE and EPA, and discuss whether or not whether it's necessary to violate that to maintain the remedy or not, and to maintain the site. From there, then a decision will be made, and that's where the contact record comes in that actually documents that decision being made and kind of what's happening, so that the public knows. And so for those where we may be regrading or digging deeper as part of our public involvement plan, we do have the requirement to post those on the DOE webpage and have those available for at least 10 days before we begin any of those efforts. So that again is the posting of that contact record and an email notification to the identified stakeholders that are also mentioned in the legacy management agreement. So that goes out and then gives an opportunity, if there is major concern, to bring that to, I think they would appropriately bring it to CDPHE for comment, and then if necessary, CDPHE would bring that back to DOE to see if anything needs to be relooked at or discussed in greater depth.
And to add to that, so these land and water use restrictions, these institutional controls, they only cover the central operable unit. And to your question about the dams, if there's any digging below 2 or 3 feet within the central operable unit, that implicates those land and water use restrictions, so that comes through us. So if and when the dams are taken down, we have an interest from the from the institutional control perspective. But taking down the dams is not part of the remedy. So I think that's something DOE could speak best to. I don't know if you're familiar with the dams. That would probably be best for Andy Kime to clarify at some point.
But to that point, because this came up sometime during COVID, I just remember it was an online form. It's come up before. Local governments have strongly come out against the breaching of the terminal dams. And DOE is well aware of that. CDPHE and EPA are well aware of that as well. There is no plan at this time to breach the dams. There's no, in the 5-year budget, there is no budget authority. There is an understanding from the departments that of the strong opposition, and there is an understanding from the departments that actually removing those dams and getting them to what they call a natural flow-through condition doesn't actually serve DOE's role and purpose at Rocky Flats. Right? The dams you do not have to keep under the regulatory agreement. They're not there what they call as part of the remedy. But at the same time, breaching them doesn't actually benefit DOE in any way, and actually just takes time and effort away from the things that they're focused on. So the assurance we basically got during that phone call, or during that meeting during COVID, was that don't worry at this time. Now, you got to change the leadership and DOE headquarters for local, and then, you know, you have to revisit that again. But for now, the message was very clear, don't worry about it.
I have another question. It's on a different topic. So the CUI weather-related inspection. So this I'm still learning. It's amazing how much I'm still learning. But what is the standard for inspection of that CUI in terms of weather? So you had kind of mentioned that, I think I missed it. Then what are those concerns that, regarding the weather on that CUI? What are you looking for in terms of weather-related activities?
So the trigger is 1 inch of precipitation in 24 hours. Now, obviously, if the snow falls on the ground and the equivalent is more than 1 inch, that snow's still on the ground, it's not doing anything. So we use some judgment obviously there, where we know when it's really looking for any kind of damage from runoff. So particularly, and a 1 inch storm event that happens over 24 hours is a lot different than 1 inch in 15 minutes. So we use some discretion. In fact, sometimes we do weather-related inspections for less than 1 inch. And what we're basically looking for is any kind of erosion or any kind of damage that could have occurred from that weather event. That's basically it.
When was the last time that you observed a significant amount of weather-related damage or erosion on the CUI?
So with the 2013 flood, which is the worst flood, I think, well, certainly since I've been at the site that we've seen, we had very little damage even from that. There was erosion in the creeks and streams, which you would expect. There was no damage to any of the dams, any of our functional channels on the CUI, any of our treatment systems, everything was fine. So basically we don't see it. We haven't seen anything significant at this point. The land, as part of the remedy, the CUI was regraded to help minimize potential for erosion due to precipitation events anyways. So, and that's what the functional channels are there for, to route the water away off the CUI in a nice, organized fashion.
Thank you.
I have a question for John. Can you briefly describe the treatments that are going to be piloted at SPPTS?
Sure.
And as you answer that, just give a little background on what she's
Yeah.
asking.
Well, that's not briefly anymore.
Well, come on.
Okay, so we hired a sub uranium at the Solar Ponds Plume Treatment System, SPPTS. They evaluated 4 different technologies, and they evaluated them through either lab-based testing or field-based testing or both.
With our water.
It was with site water, raw influent from the location spin, which you've seen in the reports. So the technology that performed the best in the bench scale testing at the site, in site conditions, over a period of some 6 weeks or so, was co-precipitation. And that's a common technology used by municipalities. I don't know if you guys use it even, or TREA, or co-precipitation is common across the Front Range, across the world. And what the technology is to add a chemical of choice, and that was what was tested here, and it's called alum. It's an aluminum sulfate, which is also commonly used for water treatment around the world. And so adding this water to the raw influent from spin at a certain rate to cause uranium to precipitate out of solution and thereby form a sludge. And then the water that moves through no longer has the uranium and goes through the rest of the system. So the sludge is what you're then left with, and that gets to be Ryan's baby. So if you have questions about sludge, you can talk to him. But the bench scale testing finished up in August or early September. They have developed a draft pilot plan that's still going through the process to make sure that we've addressed all the considerations and concerns. But it'll be, assuming, everything stands according to our current expectations, we'll begin the pilot scale testing this quarter. So possibly as soon as this week, possibly as soon as, well, it'll be November. It won't be today. November, December.
So where will it be precipitated out? In that first sort of bay? Or?
So, well, that's a good question. The scope is to do the pilot scale test. That will lead to and inform design of a full-scale component. The pilot scale test is going to be done in a connex right on the side of the concrete structure, the treatment structure that you've heard us refer to as the big box or the lagoon. So there's a connex there right now that contains all the infrastructure for this testing. And so right now, for the pilot scale test, that's where it's going to be accumulated. That's where it's going to be performed. Everything will be within that connex structure. And then the water will be rerouted through the existing vaults. It'll receive the dose of the nutrients for our denitrifying bacteria, and it'll go through the rest of the system and out just like always. Your question pertains more to the next step, which we don't know the answer to, which is where's it going to be in the future? It could potentially be within the one or both of the two treatment cells of the original structure. It could be in this connex if we were able to buy it from them, or a replacement connex, or other subsurface vaults, cells that we have on site. We don't know, and we're not going to decide that.
Do you have any idea of how much sludge might be produced?
To be honest with you, I don't have that right off the top of my head. I can get that for you. I'm sure,
It's a
but
curiosity question.
But yeah, I mean, I guess it's all relative. I'm hesitant to say specifically, but not like large amounts. I mean, we're collecting it right now.
That's one of the deliverables when they finish. They'll have estimates of all of the waste, and then we'll be able to budget how much will that cost to get rid of it and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that's
And then
what you have to do.
I'm assuming you're gonna get hit with the T-norm.
Yes, that is one of my other choices.
T-norm. Technically.
Technologically enhanced, naturally occurring radioactive material. And anytime that you take radioactive material, especially natural, and you start collecting it, concentrating it.
Isn't that called mining?
Well, mining is it, and that's where a lot of it comes from.
Yeah.
Mining.
And oil and gas.
Yeah, oil and gas is another big one.
Yeah.
You run into those regulations. And it's always fun too, because a lot of our local landfills are still trying to work through collecting it. But we have several that are working to get certified and accurate.
That falls under CDPH and India's jurisdiction.
Yes.
Where?
John, I had a question on, I thought you said that there were two well-performing methods? Or was it only the one? Is it only alum that you're going to be testing?
We're only testing alum.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I mean, we did test, at the bench scale, we tested 4.
Right.
But
Okay, I
at
thought
pilot,
there were two
only
that you
1.
had that as well.
Right.
Thank you.
Sure.
I got a question about sludge. Is it flammable?
No, it would be flammable. As far as I know, I can't see any reason why you would think it would be flammable.
Well, you're talking about T-norm, the more concentration of a toxic element, the more problematic it is.
Yeah, but I don't think we're not getting into any high levels. That was one of the basic requirements in the initial testing of how much that load is, because we don't even want to produce any type of waste that could be considered low level, just because of the cost factor, and trying to dispose of that. Obviously, you're jumping at a much higher level of cost, and so that would be prohibitive from the get-go with that particular technology.
Okay. I think I heard from that large quantities of radioactive material we don't want to find. We can't handle it.
I think, well, I mean, when you say large amounts, that's relative.
Yeah.
You know, we're talking.
Because you're talking from the surface, not, of course, from beneath the surface.
It's from groundwater.
Yeah, it's from groundwater,
right.
Yeah. So
because, well, you know, I'm only pointing out the fact that I'm paying attention to this fire, correct? And I watch how on the irrigation streams that go down Marshall Road, I-70, there are burn scars along that path, right? And it's followed the water. And there's another point of interest. There's two interesting points where I see vents coming from different parts of the Marshall Mesa, right? And I know this is anecdotal, but in some way, what I see with the fire in that zone is a relationship between streams and burns. And so that's why I asked the question.
yeah, I mean, I couldn't speak to that. I'm not familiar with the burn markings, nor have a background in fire, as far as how it reacts, and as far as leaving burn marks.
Because you're talking about small amounts of sludge, just tiny amounts, right? Like that you can't really.
Again, small, relative.
How would you quantify it?
We're collecting it, and that's where then it is tested to see, kind of.
Yes.
The concentrations. So I'm not sure.
Yeah, the concentration that we're
Right.
talking about in terms of uranium, because that's what you're talking about, right? That's your.
Well, I'm
first
looking
of
at
all,
everything of concern.
In the groundwater, what we're treating is dissolved uranium, and it's at the level of about 70-ish parts per billion. It varies. Environmental variability, it's down to 55, it's up to 89, back and forth. And so that's what we're trying to remove to below 16.8 parts per billion. And in doing that, we're adding this alum, and there's vastly more alum molecules than there are uranium molecules in this sludge, which is saturated. And so one of our jobs is to take the excess water out of that so that we size reduce it, but also the quantity of uranium in there is very little.
You guys are talking past each other. You're talking about surface flows north of Rock.
Well, no, I'm actually just trying to talk
wait.
about them both
Just
as
wait.
an anecdote to the other.
Just wait. What John is talking about is groundwater under Rocky Flats that daylights as seeps on Rocky Flats. These are completely, it's about as connected as the water in this bottle. You're not talking about the same things here. You're talking about stuff, you're asking the question about actinides north of Rocky.
Well, no. That was just an example. I don't mean to interrupt you or.
But you're talking about burn scars and you're talking about drainages, which have zero to do with groundwater contamination.
Well, what he's pointing me to in his answer, which is not confusing, is the possibility of watershed underground. We're talking about seeping small amounts of uranium out from underneath man-made containers.
I think one of the things is you have these concentrations of uranium that occur naturally.
I understand that.
And that's the difference between norm and T-norm. T-norm is regulated because of some of these other industries where there has been a manipulation, I don't know if that's quite the right word, or a direction by some sort of infrastructure or something that is directing this water and making it take a path that isn't normal, that may concentrate it, such as a discharge gallery, where water is directed to a certain area, and if it is held up in that time in that area,
right,
that may create higher levels than it would have otherwise had right in that specific area. And because of that, it falls into this regulation. Again, some
I think I'm
industries.
keeping a pretty big picture view of this. I'm not looking at one as the other.
Yeah, focus it more. So, you know, what I anticipate based on what we've seen so far, and again, we haven't, you know, collected the data, we haven't sampled it at this time, is that really it won't be any higher than you would find in areas where water is naturally funneled, where you could see a peak in the naturally occurring.
I was curious if CDPG or as a regulator, what your role will be in watching how this process plays out for the new treatment plan and how you're involved and kind of if you make recommendations or?
We can. We've been monitoring reports of the methods they're using. Certainly sludge, once they start producing that, that's something we'll have oversight of. But we have been involved in these conversations. And ultimately, this is a circular treatment system, so we're excited to see what DOE does with that. But I think a lot of time and effort has been put into figuring out how to treat uranium, and it seems like DOE has sat down, looked at 4 different methods, really taken the time to ensure they've gotten the right water in the tests this time, and yeah, we're just monitoring it at this point.
And what makes ours particularly difficult is the nitrate. That's what makes it. I mean, John, you can talk to.
That's one of the things.
You could just use resin, you know, but not in our case. You know, that's one of the biggest complicated things. And we don't have very much water.
Well, since you brought it up, so there's a couple of main things that make treatment of uranium in this water difficult. As George points out, compared to uranium, nitrate concentrations are through the roof, molecule by molecule. Uranium is measured in the influent in like 600 to 800 milligrams per liter, so parts per million, whereas uranium is 60 parts per billion. Okay, so you've got 10,000 times, you know, rounding, more nitrate than you do uranium. So if you want to treat the uranium on the front end with a uranium-specific ion exchange resin, which is a great technology, it's going to hog up all the nitrate, and then it won't have room for the uranium. So now you've expended your resin, and it's not doing you good anymore. So what if you treat the uranium or the nitrate first, and then use resin on the back end, which is something we also tested. Now it's not the nitrate that's the problem, it's the biomass from our nitrate treatment facility that clogs up the resin. I mean, this is like nasty stuff. It stinks, the water does. It smells like a sewage treatment plant because it's not sewage that it's treating, but that's what it smells like. There's a lot of, it's turbid water, it's got floaters, sinkers, it's nasty water.
But no nitrate anymore.
But no nitrate, yeah, like below detection limit. So we went from, say, 600 or 800 milligram per liter as nitrogen, which is like 4,000 times as nitrate, 4,000 milligram per liter is nitrate-ish, down to below detection limit, which is below 1, like way below 1 milligram per liter. So that's great for the nitrate, but now you can't treat the uranium with your ion exchange resin because there's so much of this biomass that clogs your resin. So now you have to try a different method to treat the effluent, but you still have to filter out this stuff. And basically what it comes down to is cost and benefit. Which is the easiest and most straightforward and efficient way to treat your uranium without going through some Rube Goldberg kind of multi-step process where you've got to do this and then that and the other and have the squirrels running on the train and pushing levers with nuts and stuff just to get the thing to work. So that's where we ended up with co-precipitation. Believe me, it was, you know, we had it's a project team working on this. None of us wanted co-precipitation. We all figured it'd be something different because we didn't want to add stuff and then make sludge. But that's what ended up being the most favorable in terms of the data and the treatment and the efficiency and the effectiveness. So that's the way we're going.
It's not the first time I've heard sludge. Sludge is present on the 903 launch pad. that just also what we understand, that when we're talking about the 55-gallon barrels that were on the 903 pad, that we're talking about form of sludge?
No, not, well, I guess.
I mean, it's a sludge, it's a sludge.
There was some solvent sludges in the drums,
Yeah.
but that was cleaned up.
To wit, sent off.
Yeah.
Right, that's what we understand.
Right.
I mean, so the consistencies of these different kinds of sludges, how would we ever be able to compare them?
Well, that was totally different.